Chapter 505, Returning. This chapter is updated by novels.pl. Captain Yi, you. The remaining sergeants of the patrol were astonished. They paused, staring at Yi Quan. Experienced sergeants knew that Yi Quan was dangerous and immediately grabbed their lances in an attempt to defend themselves. What are you looking at? Don't you know that the master of the moon worship sect has killed people? Yi Quan smiled mockingly and had a murderous look in his eyes. His body suddenly disappeared into black gas. From that black gas emerged 18 phantoms that flew towards the sergeants in the room. The 18 phantoms possessed the bodies of the sergeants. Yi Quan still stood firmly on the back of a savage beast with a spear in his hand, as if he had not moved at all. Bang bang! The sergeants of the patrol and the 18 beasts burst into a cloud of bloody fog, leaving nothing but several broken bones which fell from midair. The pungent smell of blood lingered in the air. Too weak. Yi Quan stood on the head of the purple tiger-like dragon. He fixed his gaze on Zhang Yuochen leaving and chased after him. Someone is chasing us. Maybe it's the patrol who realized something was wrong and wanted to kill us, Blackie said coldly. Blackie emitted a black light and began gathering power to fight. Zhang Yuochen calmly said, "No, he belongs to the moon worship demonic sect. You should stop now." The senior sister apprentice, Duan Mu, told him something. With his spiritual power, Zhang Yuochen could see objects 100 miles away even without opening his sky eye. He used his spiritual power to observe the patrol, which was how he knew exactly what had happened. Yi Quan chased after Zhang Yuochen and was surprised when Zhang stopped. He asked, "Why didn't you escape when you saw me coming?" Zhang Yuochen laughed and said, "You killed Fang Li and the 18 sergeants. Obviously, we are friends and not enemies. Why would I escape?" Really? Yi Quan was keen on uncovering Zhang Yuochen's strength, so he secretly mobilized his true Kai and ran in through his meridians. He unexpectedly flew from the savage beast's back. He used sophisticated bodily movements and exhibited advanced martial techniques. He walked into the open space and stood on the smooth ground. He swiftly stabbed Zhang Yuochen with his spear, moving like lightning. Yi Quan barely had to use any strength to fight with a warrior of the heaven realm. That being said, that little bit of Yi Quan's power is so strong that it is almost the same as a tree progenitor's strongest attack. Zhang Yuochen knew he was facing a superior and had to be careful. He gripped the handle of his weapon with certainty, raised his arms and swung it. The first move made by the Sword of Time was swift and neat. Though it seemed like just one move, the Sword of Time actually produces a series of moves simultaneously. Zhang Yuochen just learned the Swift, a move among thousands of moves he has yet to learn. Zhang Yuochen preferred to make the first move with the Sword of Time using sword techniques called swift swordsmanship. One move, one moment, one move, one change. Swoosh. Zhang Yuochen quickly drew his sword and carved the top of Yi Quan's head. Yi Quan's cap was sliced off by the sword, revealing long black hair that fell over his cheek. Yi Quan was shocked and quickly retreated onto the savage beast's back. He stared at Zhang Yuochen who stood across him and said, "You moved your sword so fast. I would have been unable to avoid it if you had gone for my neck instead." Zhang Yuochen put away his sword and said, "If you had used all your strength, I might not have been able to cut off your cap. You don't have to be modest. I would not have been able to escape your sword even if I used all my strength." "You were too fast," Yi Quan said. Yi Quan didn't know that Zhang Yuochen's sword technique contained the power of time. He was terrified at how fast Zhang Yuochen was able to draw his sword. He was still sweating all over. At that moment, he felt like he almost died. The power of time was harder to detect than the power of space because it left no trace. Only the half-saint who was knowledgeable on the laws of the universe could feel the very faint changes of time. Of course, Zhang Yuochen's Sword of Time still had its limitations. For one, it could only kill someone within a close range. Its sword techniques were also disconnected and movements were made independently of one another. If an enemy was not killed during the first strike, their sword would not be able to move momentarily. If Yi Quan fought with Zhang Yuochen again, he might keep a distance of more than 10 meters between them. In that case, even if Zhang Yuochen would be able to quickly draw his sword, he would not be able to hurt Yi Quan. Although Zhang Yuochen was able to secretly move swiftly, his technique would eventually be exposed. If he were to use it now, it would only be to test the power of this move for future use. The Sword of Time was still full of power. If it were used, even a master like Yi Quan could be killed. Yi Quan stared at Zhang Yuochen intensely and said, "Are you really a warrior of the Heaven Realm?" Zhang Yuochen said with a smile, "Of course." Yi Quan may suspect something over time. After all, he was the most intelligent person in the moon worship demonic sect. He had also reached the Heaven Realm and entered the Heaven Board. Yi Quan had reached the fourth change in the Fish Dragon Realm, but he almost died by the sword of a warrior of the Heaven Realm. Even if he told other people, no one would believe him. Yi Quan put away his spear and said, "No wonder you were chosen by the Saintness. You are unrivaled and I admire you." Zhang Yuochen didn't know if Yi Quan knew Duan Mook Singerling's status. He then asked curiously, "Who is the Saintness?" Yi Quan laughed and said, "If the Saintness hasn't revealed her identity to you, maybe it is not time. However, she ordered me to help you in the primitive world of Wood Spirit, so I'll try my best to help you." Yi Quan paused and contemplated for a few moments. He then turned serious and said, "Through my investigation, I have discovered that there is a great secret hidden in the depths of Blackwood Field. Since you've been there, can you tell me anything about it?" Yi Quan was obviously exploring the Blackwood Field secret to report it to the moon worship demonic heresy. Maybe that's why he hid in the primitive world of Wood Spirit. The secret of Blackwood Field was of great importance. After careful consideration, Zhang Yuochen decided to tell Yi Quan something. If Zhang Yuochen were to leave the primitive world of Wood Spirit, the Chi of Origin would disappear and the whole world would begin to collapse. An event of this scale would definitely disturb high levels of the Ministry of War, who would begin a thorough investigation. With their connections, Zhang Yuochen, who would have snuck into the primitive world of Wood Spirit, would definitely be found. The best course of action would be to let the moon worship demonic heresy stop the Ministry of War. Zhang Yuochen explained, "There is an altar in the depths of the Blackwood Field, which was engraved with inscriptions. I assume it was made by the psychic sage." Zhang Yuochen's findings intrigued Yi Quan. He turned serious and said, "I've also been to the depths of Blackwood Field and observed the altar from a distance. It seemed highly unusual, so ordinary people could not have built it." Zhang Yuochen said, "I entered the altar and found something even more shocking." "What is it?" Yi Quan asked. Zhang Yuochen said, "The Chi of Origin in the primitive world of Wood Spirit has been suppressed under the altar." "What?" Yi Quan was shocked. His facial expression kept changing, unable to contain his thoughts and emotions until he realized the seriousness of this situation. Such an important finding had to be reported to the high level of the moon worship demonic heresy. Yi Quan stared at Zhang Yuochen and said, "Why did the Ministry of War do this? What was the purpose?" Zhang Yuochen laughed and said, "If you don't know, how would I know? Besides, the Chi of Origin is very strong. I would not be able to get close to it." Yi Quan nodded. Yi Quan wasn't aware of the fact that the Chi of Origin in the primitive world of Wood Spirit had been taken by Zhang Yuochen. After all, the Chi of Origin was quite powerful. Even though it was only the origin of Chi in the inferior primitive world, it could only be controlled by a half-saint. Regardless of how great Zhang Yuochen's swordsmanship was, he was only a warrior of the Heaven Realm. Before the Chi of Origin, he was nobody. Zhang Yuochen said in a serious tone, "I want to go back to the Chaotic Millionverse Mountain immediately. I wonder if Captain Yek knows." Yi Quan put his thoughts away and said, "The Saintness has already ordered and arranged it. I'll take you to a primitive world boat." Zhang Yuochen thought, "She deserves to be the Saintness in the heresy because she has energy beyond the expectations of ordinary people." Amongst the inferior primitive world, the primitive world of Wood Spirit was at the highest level. Even if the Ministry of War brought a command into effect, many noble young men would come forward for the experience. Under Yi Quan's leadership, Zhang Yuochen and Blackie got on a ship to return to the Chaotic Millionverse Mountain. There were also other noblemen on the ship. While standing on the ship, Zhang Yuochen looked down and asked, "Captain Yi, why don't you return to the Chaotic Millionverse Mountain with us?" Yi Quan said with a smile, "I have to deal with some things first. When I'm done, I'll go back." Zhang Yuochen nodded, understanding what Yi Quan was saying. Fang Li and the 18 sergeants died tragically, so he had to write an explanation. Yi Kun wouldn't leave the primitive world of Wood Spirit until he had handled it. Yi Kun watched the ship fly away from the ground. His eyes turned cold and he said, "What is the Ministry of War planning? I did not expect the Chi of Origin in the primitive world of Wood Spirit to be suppressed under the altar. I have to report it to the Half-Saint Tonksue immediately." When it comes to the Chi of Origin in a primitive world, Yi Kun had to be very careful. He had to report it to the half-saints of heresy and have them solve it.